My name is Jennifer Walsky, and I'm actually a Social Impact Fellow within IPSI here at Haas School of Business. And this really began as a journey 30 years ago with a friend, 30 years ago for Burning Man. But for me, just a few years ago, 3 years ago, when I was turning 50 with my friend, we decided to do something different. And it became this 3-year odyssey where we started researching and writing the case. What's so compelling about Burning Man is that it chose intentionally to move from a LLC format to a nonprofit format and really instilling and exemplifying their values. So I have here Rich Lyons, one of our favorite deans. I think we can all admit that Rich is the best and unique in being a dean that is going to conduct this kind of discussion on Burning Man. We also have Mikel, also known as Danger Ranger. In fact, he has his jacket in the back room. Really one of the early founders of Burning Man. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to them. If you like what you hear tonight, we have a case on Burning Man that was just published. Take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Michael, for being here with us today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
It's remarkable. Let me just say a few things about what you and your co-founders have established. It is remarkable. So it started back in 1986, really. This is over, of course, 30 years ago, and it was on Baker Beach in San Francisco, and there was an effigy that they burned out on the beach, and it was an 8
foot tall.
8 foot tall, and so here we are today. As most of you know, it is in Nevada. Blackrock City is what it's called, getting close to 70,000 people that are coming to this. It continues to grow. What we will hear about later is it's gone international. There are many other countries that are doing things along these lines. And so why does something catch on that strongly, and what propels it? And we'll hear more about that. But there are some fundamental values that go along with it. Some of the people that are regularly on the playa, as they call it, Elon Musk, Dennis Kucinich, Ohio Congressman, Grover Norquist, Libby Schaaf, Sergey Brin, Larry Page. Look, the list could go on and on and on. There are a lot of people that want to experience it, and in some ways, get away from their daily lives and experience something fundamentally different. Lots of Berkeley professors, not surprisingly. The wonderful photographs in the background here that we'll just let them float through from along the talk here. Tom Stahl, one of our MBA alums, and his wife Julie Kim, they're both 1993, is a burner, is a photographer, obviously, and these are just wonderful images and give you some sense of what's happening. So let me start with a question again, thanking you, Michael, for being here. So how about just the question of surprise? What has surprised you the most these 30-some years later? What's surprising about this?
I think what surprised me the most is the fact that we're still doing it.
Yes, yeah.
There have been many, many challenges.
And describe some of the, like were you at Baker Beach for more than a year? Did you realize that something big could happen even back then?
Not really. I mean, the first Burning Man at Baker Beach was just a family picnic.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
And
that's all it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we poured gasoline on this thing, and suddenly,
boom!
And people came running from up and down the beach.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, we should do that again.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
Yes.
And so that it's still going on. I want to dig a little deeper in that, because I mean, from early on, you knew this thing felt like it was going to continue to grow.
It was about 1993, actually, that I looked out, and there were maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people, and I thought, this means something. This is important.
Yeah. And did you already? So let's kind of jump directly into what people are coming for, and I'm sure lots of different people come for lots of different things. But what's the first thing on your list that's drawing people in?
Well, the thing is the mystery. Is you can't describe what it is. But then people see these millions of images pouring out on the internet of this strange thing in the desert, this weird place. Yeah. And they're drawn to it. And they hear it from their friends who come back from Burning Man and run for hours and hours about Burning Man. Yeah. And so they get interested.
They got to try it.
Yeah.
And then, so it's not, when we think about some of the values, like one of, you have a set of 10,
yes,
10
we do.
sort of core values. One of them, they're all really interesting, but like radical self-expression, I think is one of them, right? So part of the art that we're seeing behind us, right? This is all constructed in a matter of days, and it's taken down, you know, in a matter of days.
Well, Burning Man is probably the most free place on the planet. There's tremendous freedom for people to express themselves. Yeah. And at the same time, there's a social responsibility because they're in a community. But there's nothing like it. I think Burning Man, or Blackrock City, as I've been calling it since 1995, is probably the first interplanetary city on the Earth.
And can you help me understand? I wanted to get
Well, you'll just have to come out and experience it.
That's part of the mystery, man. Come on. Can't explain it. If you don't get it, you gotta come. Okay. But so I think, you know, one of the things that's going on the Berkeley campus, for example, is this idea that the arts really matter. That participation in the arts, whatever that word means to you, and it can mean a lot of different things, but a high percentage of the nearly 70,000 people that are coming are sort of, you know, they're certainly experiencing art in a way that many of them, right? I mean, just you can tell you're going to experience art a little differently if you're in this environment. But they're participating in art, many of them, in a way that they just don't regularly, right?
Yes. Well, Burning Man is the largest art gallery on the planet, actually. And the thing about the art at Burning Man, we want it to be participatory. We want people to interact with the art. It should have some function that draws people into it, that they can participate and be a part of it. And that's the important thing about the art of Burning Man.
I love that. I love that. And you mentioned to me earlier this idea that some people needed to see a category in what you were doing. And I think in the early era, you were saying, we're an art festival. Can you say a little about that?
Well, we're a community too.
Well, no, it's evolved. But I'm talking sort of in the early. You mentioned you had a phrase.
In the early years, we would go out to the desert, and people would see all these crazy people with tattoos and purple hair, and camping out in the desert and building this giant wooden figure, you know. And of course, first they thought we were a bunch of Satanists. You know, that was outrageous. But then we got to know the locals. And we got to show them the art that's out there, and you could participate in it and help build it. So suddenly we've got cowboys and rocket scientists working side by side.
Yep, yep, and really enjoying the experience. And so also the notion of gifting, the notion that, you know, there is no buying and selling, there's no commerce in the traditional sense. Can you say a little bit about that? Was that there from the very beginning?
Yes, actually it has been. We have what we call a gift economy, and that's one of our principles. And at the same time, we have a principle of decommodification. And the idea is to take people in an environment where they're not being bombarded with ads, buy this, buy that, you know, booths everywhere selling stuff. And we found that by doing so, the problem with so many exchanges that people have is they're based on commerce. When you remove that, the connection between people is more real, more close. So we basically said, okay, no money is allowed at Burning Man. You can come out here, you can do anything you want, but everybody gives gifts. Yeah. So there are people that bring gifts to give away. There are people that set up entire restaurants, coffee shops. And everything is free. Yeah. And it teaches people to be aware when they go back into the world of commerce, they begin to think differently about their interactions. You think about the society that we've built, which is a consumer society, is literally destroying the planet. We are gobbling up resource to make more stuff. There's enough stuff in the world already. And you get people thinking about the things that they consume and the things that they buy, and I think it's very important. It changes the way they think, and it's a teaching mechanism.
Yeah. So this, I mentioned this to you briefly, but this is the first zero waste building on the Berkeley campus. And for a lot of us, it's our first quote unquote zero waste experience. It's the first time we've looked for a trash can and couldn't find one. And that's very helpful for opening people up to some of these ideas. And I would imagine that for an awful lot of people, right, that idea of sort of leaving nothing behind and kind of, you know, zero waste.
One of our principles is leave no trace.
Leave no trace.
You come to this event, you bring everything you need to survive. Your shelter, your food, and your water. And you take all of your trash away with you. And it makes people realize the impact on the planet. And it's very effective.
It's gotta be. I mean, I would imagine that you could peel off any one of your 10 values. Like if you said live for a week in the desert, leave no trace. That's the only principle, right? That by itself would be
trash cans out
would be a fascinating time. Or the one that we talked about before, radical self-expression, right? Or gifting, right? It's sort of like, you know, opening up, as you said, a cafe to serve people because you want to do that. And there's enough reciprocity to make that economy work, right? Obviously, you do need some reciprocity to make that work, but it can work. So when you think about the phrase welcome home, right? I think for a lot of people, when they come to the playa and they hear that, this is, I mean, for some people, I think the closest they get to that feeling would be a summer camp that they went to for 15 years in a row. You know, that would be part of it. So the welcome home notion probably started very early on as well. This community, this is a community, you're back.
There's a very strong community and this sense of community there. And what people are finding out is when they go and have this experience, they're in this community, in this environment, and then they have to go to the outside. And it just kind of shocks them in a way. So when they return the next year, or even beginners who arrive there, we always say, welcome home. Because it feels like home. It's real.
It is real. And it's also, I think people feel a sense of affiliation, belonging, connection, all of those things that make it so successful, right? They're going back, and they don't go back as an individual to connect to some really neat stuff. They're going back to be part of a community, and that's not easy to do in life today, right? I think it's
and the world we're in is becoming even more divided and separated in so many ways that we're losing connection with each other.
Well, I mean, we even see it in local neighborhoods. I mean, I remember when I grew up in a neighborhood where on July 4th, the whole neighborhood got together and did some fireworks. And anyways, the little things that you realize we hardly know our neighbors.
That's right.
There are many measures of this, right? But it's...
Burning Man, you get to know your neighbors. When you walk down the street, people look you in the eye.
And
they say hello.
So Danger Ranger.
My playa persona.
But also the function of the Rangers, right? Because you might imagine that from time to time you do need some people that are keeping some order, right? Or taking care of somebody that needs assistance, right? And so talk a little bit about the Rangers and how that came about.
There's an organization at Burning Man called the Blackrock Rangers. And they are community helpers and mediators. And I wanted a group that was not like the heavy-handed authority of the police, but people who act in sort of that kind of a role, but they came from the community. And I took the idea of the Rangers from my own heritage, go right back to Texas, so the Texas Rangers. They were people from the community, and they would range far and wide to take care of people. And so in 1992, very early in Burning Man's history, the instructions were to get off on La Playa and drive this way for 14 miles. There's no roads there. You turn right and you go for another 5.6 miles, and there's the camp. Of course, if you missed it by a couple of degrees, you went veering off into the desert and were lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the first role was search and rescue. We had radios, we had communication. And we would go screaming across the desert at 90 miles an hour, looking for lights in the distance at night.
Yeah.
And we would pull up and say, "You looking for Burning Man?" "Oh my God, we've been driving for 4 hours."
Yeah.
And we would bring them into camp.
I see.
But as the community grew larger and grew into city, their role changed.
Yeah.
So now they work within the city to mediate disputes, to help people that need help.
Yeah.
And from those 6 friends of mine, we've grown into an organization of 900 rangers in Blackrock City.
Wow.
And there are ranger groups with the other regionals all over the world now.
Yeah.
And we have a particular ethos and style, and it's been very effective and a great alternative to policing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know, consistent, fully consistent, obviously, with your values, your principles, right? And it's, you know, when that's lined up with what the community believes in, obviously that kind of changes the nature of these order providers.
There are very few prohibitions at Burning Man. You know, if you're not hurting someone, you know, you can act and be and dress like you want to, or not dress.
Yeah.
And so it's very liberating.
I would imagine.
And we don't have a lot of rules to have to enforce. And we're all in the same community, and we get along very well.
It would be interesting to try and implement those principles here at the Haas School. Right? Maybe just for one day, right? We could just give it a try. And so you mentioned regionals. I want to make sure we have time for questions, because I know people have questions, right? But let me ask this question about the regionals. So I don't mean to put kind of a business spin on it, but part of what you've done, to use the business jargon, is you've scaled something in a remarkable way, right?
And not in a franchise way.
I understand. And you've got and you've got very happy customers. I apologize to use that word. And you've built, or people have come to you, and you have helped them to build these regionals around the world.
We have now the regional Burning Man events in 34 countries.
Remarkable.
And even across the U.S., dozens that get together, and some burn something and some don't.
Yeah.
But they're all based on the principles of Burning Man.
Yeah.
But the thing is, each area is unique. And we don't dictate to them exactly how do they have to be, as long as they follow the principles.
Yeah, yeah.
And as a matter of fact, some of the fastest growing regional events that are happening in other countries right now are in countries which have had conflict in communities for generations and generations. South Africa, we now have 13,000 people coming. Another regional called Midburn, which takes place in Israel, is growing rapidly. Here you have Israelis and Palestinians camping side by side. Who would have thought?
Yeah. And so I think the suggestion is that there's an intense human need that maybe is being less met in those societies than in many others, and people need to find a way to satisfy that, and you've found a way. I mean, it's also true that, you know, it sounds like the fixed point, the common thread is these principles, right? And so, you know, that remarkable communities can get built on a set of principles. And it's sort of like, it's going to be totally different, and here are the principles, and let's see what comes out of it, right? Do you have a favorite principle among the 10? I know they're all important.
Well, I've always liked decommodification.
Yeah.
I was, you know, even ever since Adbusters magazine came out years and years ago, I've been really big about watching how commerce and commercialism affects us and harms the planet. So
Yeah.
I've been a big fan of that.
Love that. Love that. Let's open it up. I know there's some good thoughts and questions and maybe an experience or two that you'd like to communicate from the playa. So we have microphones. We'll take the first one over here.
But I want to say, Burning Man is not against commerce, and we're not against business. But we think a policy of profit enough and placing social goals and people goals ahead of financial bottom line, those are the companies that are going to succeed in the future.
Well, and you did that yourselves when you moved into a 501c3, right? That's
Gave
part
it
of
all
what
away,
the case
yeah.
is about,
Yeah.
is sort of transforming yourself. They were originally a for-profit LLC because it gave them the agility and so forth. And then for the last 4 or 5 years, they've been running under a nonprofit structure. And that's given...
I'm not going to live forever, and I want this thing to continue.
And so that's a structure that puts some longevity into what they're doing. Please, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Elida, and I'll share a little bit about my experience coming into the Burning Man community as well as a question that I have. I had a friend who started going in '92 and tried to recruit me, and I very much felt like, oh, I'm not a Burning Man person. And then when I moved to San Francisco in '02, all my first friends that I met here all said, oh, but you're so Burning Man, you're so Burning Man, you must go. So finally, I within a couple months of moving here, I went with them. And immediately, without even having crossed the gate, I felt like, oh yeah, I'm totally home. And the group that I went with were all people of color, Palestinians, Persians, Punjabi folks, Asian Americans, African Americans. I'm Mexican descent, and I know it takes place on a reservation. And coming back from Burning Man that initial time and subsequently, often the comment or question I get is like, oh, but Burning Man's so white. Like, how does that feel when you're there? And that just, I know that there's been some intentionality, and here I'm the Director of Inclusion and Diversity. So wondering if you could speak to artist grants and kind of partial scholarships and things that you've done to try to continue to be inclusive as a community and to offer space for folks that are coming from a variety of backgrounds. I know, for example, one of my friends, Fabiana Rodriguez, does a theme camp where, for a few years now, she's had these like Migration is Beautiful workshops and Black Lives Matter workshops, and that I think often the external perception is not realizing that there's part of the playa that speaks to the experience of people of color, and that Native folks in the surrounding community also have access through scholarships or free tickets and things like that. So wondering if you can speak to kind of what you've intentionally done to continue to have that be diverse.
Burning Man welcomes everyone. Anybody can come to Burning Man. We have a pretty extensive low-income ticket program where people can apply and write up an application, and there are 5,000 of those. I think that people say that Burning Man is primarily white, and I believe that's probably a reflection of the society in general, is that there are divisions out there which appear to be reflected by the choices and the cultures that people of color, of different ethnic origins come from, that makes them choose whether to come to Burning Man or not come to Burning Man. But Burning Man is, like I say, probably the first city that's more open than anywhere else you will find in the world.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Elida, for your question. Please.
Yeah, is this on? Great.
Yes.
This is actually a question for both of you. I'd like to see how that can be answered. You started off by indicating several very innovative and wealthy people that are at Burning Man. And a lot of artists say that they have all their creative ideas for the year done in 1 week. And also, Silicon Valley just about empties out and goes up there. And then they go back with their minds completely blown to do creative things. How do you think, in economic terms, could the value of Burning Man be measured? As in how much innovation is developed from attending that festival?
I heard a
Was
couple
that a
of
good-
things,
People
value
are
and
laughing?
innovation and art. So, I mean, there's more art. Burning Man provides more support for artists than the city of San Francisco. That's pretty substantial. We give away a lot of money in art grants, and so there's a tremendous amount of creativity that occurs out there.
And do people get that before they come, and then they can
They
use
get
it
that
while they-
usually afterward.
After.
They go to Burning Man the first time and say, oh my God, here's what I can do next year.
Time. Got it.
Or, this changed my life. I'm going to quit my job and do something else. Or, I'm going to start doing art. I mean, it's really, and technology, the tech industry, how many ideas were thought of at Burning Man?
Yeah. Or the kinds of conversations that maybe are a little more likely to happen in that
Right.
environment than, because
There's
you know,
a synergy that occurs out there with people and conversations.
Yeah. Well, and the question's a really interesting one, and as you know, I think implicit in your question, finding that sort of indirect economic effects from anything are devilishly difficult typically. I guess one thing that I would point to, I mean, there are ideas, one could try and track ideas that came from a given Burning Man, but one of the things that I think happens to a lot of people is something that I sometimes talk about with the students, that there's the knowledge transfer that's a really important part of what we do in education at the university, and we'd like you to not just know things, but also do things. But at the end of the day, the really big payoff to a great education is identity making. It's when somebody sort of sees themselves really fundamentally differently. And I think that's a little bit part of what's happening with these values, is that some people plug into that and think, I've never had an experience anything like that. I mean, not even close. And there's a kind of self-revelation that happens. I'm not really answering your question other than to say, it's even harder to put an economic impact on that. But I think ultimately that's why things like this are so powerful and so effective, is because people's identities get shifted. They see things in themselves they just weren't taking the time to see.
Very good. I wish I'd said that.
So more questions, please.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. When I first became a part of this community, I feel like I heard so many stories, both about the long-term, how much Burning Man has changed since the very beginning, and the short-term of how it changes year by year. And I'm curious, as you think about the defining principles that y'all have, like how you think about shaping the change that you want to have in these types of communities, and how much you let be defined by the participants, and how you grapple with the challenges inherent in both.
So there were a couple of angles about how Burning Man has changed and how we grapple with the future.
Yes, yeah, so for example, I heard about Burning Man kind of in the 90s being a very different type of experience than it is now, and also looking more at the recent history about how over the past few years, as you have different types of people come into that community, or obviously there's big questions about money and people flying in for short experiences. I know this is something that y'all are grappling with. So I'm curious how you think about shaping the culture that you want to have, kind of from a tops down with the principles, and also how you think about giving space for the culture to create itself.
The early days of Burning Man were pretty wild and woolly. And the things that we did and the things that affected people were different in a sense. And today, there's so much going on, but the core thing, the experience, that key that affects people is the same. And that's what we still have. Certainly, we're reaching a much broader audience, and people of means, Silicon Valley, and they come out here, but they're just like everybody else. They have maybe a fancier camp, but to be on the playa, everyone is equal. And I think that by reaching these people and having those kinds of people also have a Burning Man experience. We didn't have those kinds of people out there in the beginning, and now we do, and we're reaching a much larger population. So I think their participation and their presence at Burning Man is very important. And what we need to do is ensure that they are learning and absorbing our values. And there's a lot of techniques that we're doing to work with those people in those camps to make sure that they participate and they are a part of the community.
And if I can continue on that, thanks for that question. So are there certain behaviors that over the years maybe have started to reflect themselves where you think, hey, that's not really what we're looking for? And just one example is you shared that you know, people can use their phones to take pictures and so forth. But the idea of having lots of people checking email on the playa can't be
uploading
something. Or uploading.
Facebook, yeah.
Right? So you know, for something like phone use, as it's because you didn't have any technology, as I understand the early
years. We were completely cut off.
So as that started, was there a discussion among the founders?
There was a discussion, and we certainly are concerned with that even now. Technology is so pervasive. And what we're doing is using peer pressure to discourage people from doing anything more than taking photos. If you have to get on the phone, if you have to talk to someone, go in your tent. Yeah. But don't do it in the broader community.
Yeah. And peer-to-peer people are sort of
reminding people.
Remind people. Wait a minute, please. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thanks. Other thoughts and questions? I have a few more that I can jump into. I'm you know, when you think about so Burning Man in cyberspace, right? I mean, if you felt that this, I'm going to call it a movement. I don't know if that's a word you would use, but if you thought about this movement having a kind of, you know, a full digital reflection, you talked a little bit about, you know, managing the cyberspace manifestations of Burning Man. But do you feel like the digital world is one where a lot of what Burning Man represents can get expressed, or?
I do think it can be expressed there. As a matter of fact, Burning Man has had a presence in cyberspace since 2000. There's an annual event that occurs there where people log in or put on their goggles and meet at a place. And in learning how to manage this, I realized there are certain tools and techniques that can be applied to cyberspace to kind of somewhat mimic the Burning Man experience. And first they arrive and it's a playa. It's very familiar. And secondly, the funny thing in cyberspace, you can fly if you want. Hit a button, you're just zoom. But when you're doing that, it's like driving on the freeway and you're not seeing what's happening in the community next to you. So I said, I made a rule. In this cyberspace place, gravity works. You have to stay down. So everybody's on the same XY plane, and that allows more interactions. And people go through an experience. There's a big art, and there's a simulated fire, and there's dancing, and there's connections made. And by and large, we're starting to be able to translate some little bit of the Burning Man experience into cyberspace. And that's an area that I'm keenly interested in working on.
And the 10 principles are obviously the same, right?
Yes, you can't buy anything, you can't put up an ad for anything, you're not allowed to.
It's not Burning Man without them. So I have a card with the 10 principles on them. I just thought I would read all of them. A few of them have already come up. Radical inclusion.
Everyone is welcome.
Gifting. Decommodification. Radical self-reliance. Radical self-expression. Communal effort. Civic responsibility. Leaving no trace, you mentioned. Participation. And immediacy. What's immediacy here?
Immediacy is be here now. Be present. That's Don't be on your cell phone
Yeah.
or your smart device, but to be in the moment, to have the experience. And that's when it gets real.
Mm-hmm. Listening, watching.
Right.
Fully. Yeah. And civic responsibility in this setting. What?
Civic responsibility, and that's a trade-off between radical self-expression. You're free to express yourself, but at the same time, you need to be aware of and be respectful of those around you.
And so, just, if I may ask, and then we've got 2 questions waiting, but just real quickly, did the 10 principles sort of spring forward as an ensemble? Because you just expressed an insight, right? These things trade off against one another.
Right.
They're not absolute. There are tensions inherent.
Yes.
Could you kind of see those tensions early on, and you thought, we need this ensemble?
It's something that the principles were there.
Yeah.
We had never really identified them
I see.
up until, I think, about a decade ago.
Okay.
And we
So you
made
codified.
firm, codified
Got it.
things that we were already doing, things that worked.
That you knew were important. Got it.
Yeah, so Larry Harvey, our founder, thought about this and long and hard, and he came to a meeting and says, I've got 9 principles. I've identified them. I said, Larry, you got to have 10.
Do you remember which was the 10th?
I don't recall which one was
recall.
missing, but
So,
it was there anyway.
I love that. So I don't know who was first. We'll go here and then right over here. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. My name is Jaime. I'm curious about how you think about your leadership team. Thinking about what you've done to maybe bring the people who are supporting you together, I guess, since it started, and how, for such an unconventional organization, how to think about making the hard choices and making the hard decisions, and maybe bringing the right people to lead with you.
Getting the right people to lead. When we transformed into a 501c3, we looked around for people that shared our values and people that could pitch in and help. And I think that's the important thing, is find people that share your values and will carry these into the future. So finding key people is very important.
And this is on the senior team as well as your board, because now
Absolutely,
you've got a
yes.
board,
Mhm.
right? And these were people, most of them, you know, you'd known
Experienced burners.
from thank you for that. Yeah, fundamental. And you can imagine having a board when you didn't used to have a board, right? I mean, boards are given governance rights,
Yes.
right? I mean, that's what a board, you know, something other than just an advisory board means. Please. Yeah, go for it.
I was wondering, do you worry about the commodification of the Burning Man experience or a Burning Man-like experience? And also, do you worry about people coming to the burn and expecting forms of commodified experiences that they get at other similar type music festival, art festival, or other events?
Well, the people that come expecting a commodified experience are rudely awakened immediately. I've always been concerned about commodification. Matter of fact, we've been approached by lots of big companies wanting to put their ad up or use their name. And of course, we've always refused. But Burning Man is so popular right now that there are companies, corporations, attempting to mimic or get close to some of our ideas. I've even seen ads on television that look a little bit like Burning Man. And that's because Burning Man is so popular and so unique. But we've never sold out.
Yeah, yeah. But there are givens, right? I mean, there's always a man and there's always a burn. And,
Yes,
but,
yes,
but that's not what we mean by commodification.
Yeah,
Yeah. Please.
I think Burning Man is a utopian for a lot of people, and is a massive social experiment. So as a founder, when you founded this social experiment, how do you prevent some unintended consequences or catastrophes like all those previous social experiments have left on people? the second question is that if we want to have social experiments in our daily lives, and what kind of advice you would have for us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I say Burning Man is a cult, but it's a cult where you wash your own brain. It's a utopia that only exists for a short time. And that may be a part of the magic. How far and how long we could possibly extend that is an interesting question.
Yeah.
I don't know. But right now we're trying to take our ideas and principles into a broader world to help change that world a little bit. Maybe it won't be a utopia, but it'll certainly be better than the road we're heading down now.
Well, and shifting just a little bit of the DNA from an earlier question, right? This idea, if there are these little chunks of identity shift where somebody comes back and thinks, I just had never had that experience. It just opened an eye, you know, for me, and that might carry on. The notion of social experiments, it is, I love the point you just made, right? If you sort of said, well, let me ask this question. At the end of the Burning Man period, are people, I mean, do they get into a rhythm? Can you see the difference, the dynamics in people's behavior from the start to the end?
While they're going through the event?
While they're going through it in a given year, right? I guess, in other words, if you did it for a month, do you think some unintended behaviors would start happening? And
well, some people said, this is not for me, and they just leave.
Yeah.
And other people go home broken and crying. The effects do tend to last, though.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, people will go and talk to their friends for hours and hours. Oh, I just got back from Burning Man. And, you know, it's hard to throttle them down because they are so excited, and it affects them so tremendously.
Yeah. But the point you made, I think, really is a profound one, that it's got a time frame to it. And if it were something you were doing, you know, for an extended period of time, it might have a very different impact. And it might go places where it's just hard to know where it would go.
And as a business model, or as a social model, or as an environmental model, it's very good, because we build a city that exists for 8 days, and then we erase it all.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing left except
the
memories and experiences of the people and the data. We take all the data that we have gathered, all that we have learned, and we use that to recreate the next city, to improve our systems, all of our different kinds of systems. And that's a broad range of topics. And we get to do it again. So it's recycling.
There's a lot of learning.
And it gets better and better each cycle.
Yeah. Well, that you know, I think that is outstanding, because going back to the question, if we thought about the way most social experiments play out, whether it's a kibbutz or what have you, these are ongoing, most of them, experiments, right? And so in that sense, what you're doing is quite different than what most of us think of when we think of a social experiment. Please.
In the early days when we started, we would make a new LLC each year. It drove the bookkeepers crazy.
Please.
Hi, Tad Tobar, undergrad here at Haas. Thank you so much for coming. I've been looking forward to it all day, all week, in fact. Kind of dovetailing off the theory of utopia. I was talking to Marco Sissezi. He's at the environmental design. I have a wonderful class with him. And we talk about utopia. And in a class, he talks about it being very reactionary, very authoritative, and very planned. And I had to pick his brain and say, hey, I'm going to go see this great guy. I think you're pretty great. And you talk about space so much. And when I think of Burning Man, I think of a space. And he thinks, and my professor was like, well, space is very dynamic. We see it as an input, or I see it as an input rather than an output. But kind of coming back to the theory of utopia, do you see it as utopia? And if not, what do you see it as? Because it is a place for free expression and free human connection. And when you open that up and you leave it open to, to define itself, it becomes something so much more powerful. Would you call that utopia?
Utopia, that's, what's the definition of utopia? You take these people and you put them in a very hot, dusty place with no showers. What kind of utopia is this anyway?
But it is a kind of...
a mental utopia, perhaps?
Yeah, spiritual, experiential.
What are people looking for in a
that's
utopia?
The question.
That begs the question. What do you want from your utopia? Belonging. You'll find it there.
Right. Well, I think that's a fundamental human need, right? And it's scarce for people.
Yeah.
I think.
We have a wonderful tribe, and it's growing, and there's a tremendous sense of community within that tribe.
Yeah. And if you said certainly people in their faith, their church, they're things we plug into in their school, hopefully to some degree, very, very different in some ways. But when you think about where you find your community in your life right now, to some degree it's in our families, of course, but where are you finding your community? And is there anything that's fulfilling the kinds of needs that seem to be pretty well fulfilled by this? That's a fun question. Or if you also asked yourself, have there been experiences in your own life where in a short period of time, a day, a week, 8 days, you got pretty fundamentally changed by an experience? I think most of us can point to one or two of those in our lives. I don't think I could point to 10, but I can point to a few. Yeah. And then you ask, what defined that moment for me? And I think it is a kind of, at least for me, a very different perceptual place, that something sort of said, wow, I am just looking at this very differently now. And that's part of, you're providing an instrument for people to do that.
People have often thought about or discussed the subject of religion. Burning Man, there's a sense of spirituality there, and we have rituals that we do, but there's no dogma. You're free to choose any path you want. But it does fulfill a need for a lot of people that they don't find in today's society.
And I would imagine we would find some very traditional faiths also manifesting themselves on the playa, right? Yeah. People wanting to talk about the Talmud or whatever, right? That it would be, that it's that inclusive, right? Yeah. It's not. Please, Courtney. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. We'll do. I don't know who was first. I'm sorry, Courtney, and then we'll go here.
I think mine's a short one. I would love to hear what has been your most personal, memorable experience you've had at a Burning Man.
Huh. I can't talk about that.
Okay. Like the second or the third most personal? Can you?
I've had what you call a peak experience, and without drugs. But an experience where I felt a oneness with everything.
Yeah.
And no drugs, nothing. But it was incredible and amazing. And I saw things and I learned things that were so strong and profound, I had to erase them from my memory and let them perk up as the years went by.
Wow. Wow. Never forget that. Please, and I think we have to make this the last question. Please.
Thank you for coming, Michael. I have a question for you. You talked about the temporary state of Burning Man. How long does it last? It lasts like a week or so, something like that. Can you speak to Fly Ranch, specifically what it's about and what the Burning Man organization's plans are for it in terms of a longer-term vision?
In 1997, we went through a transformation, and we moved the Burning Man event. It was pretty small then, 10,000 people, over the next little mountain into this other little valley to private property at a place called Fly Ranch. It was named Fly Ranch because during World War I it was used as a pilot training ground for airplanes. But anyway, it's almost 4,000 acres. And it has a little playa there, and it has hot springs. It's beautiful, wetlands, a beautiful piece of property, and we had a great time. 300 naked people in a hot pool is an amazing thing to experience. But anyway, we've always wanted to go back to there. And recently, the Burning Man organization managed to acquire that piece of property. And what we want to do is use that to promote Burning Man culture. We're currently undergoing a very scientific analysis of all of its resources, everything from animals to plant to the hydrology. And we're going to do a study and decide what kind of uses we can put it to. We want to tread very lightly on the land. We want to use alternative technologies. We're looking at it as a possible cultural center, as a think tank, as an art space, as a possible place for small gatherings to experience. So we're very much looking forward to this place, but it's the first permanent place on the earth that Burning Man now has a kind of home. That answer your question?
Well, Michael, look, you know, what you and your co-founders have created, you know, when we think of, you know, how powerful is the notion of community, and how powerfully can we experience that, right? Mm-hmm. When we think about the power of the shared values that were created, which in some ways is the kernel, is the core of what the rest of it is wrapping around. If you think about that notion of expression, self-expression, the power of expressing oneself and taking oneself out of the normal flow, right? How many times in our workaday lives do we realize, man, I can't even tell you what happened over the last hour, right? We're just not paying attention. We're doing something. So it's quite a magical thing. And as we all think about in our own lives how we connect to meaningful things. You've shown us a fascinating path.
I think Burning Man has come about as a particularly unique time in history. We're, I believe, going from a shift from this consumer culture into an experience economy.
Yes.
And the values are different there.
Yeah.
And a sense of community is very important. And so I think Burning Man can help teach the world how to make a transition, having experiences, connecting people together, solving some of the problems that we have here on this planet of destroying the planet and social friction.
It's a fundamental transition.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.